Welcome to everybody. It's a privilege and honor to be able to host an event of this caliber. I want to start today's session by just sharing a personal story in my life that still makes me smile even today and teaches me a lesson. Many years ago, when my British husband, Martin, moved back to China with me, he could understand some basic Chinese. So at a family dinner, he got asked by my aunt. So my aunt said, "Hey, Martin, so how much money do you make in a year?" Martin just froze and stopped talking and looked away from my aunt. And my aunt was quite puzzled and she was genuinely quite confused. And at that moment, I found myself doing what many of you probably do on a daily basis, translating not just language, but culture. So I whispered to my aunt, "Hey, aunt, Western people don't usually ask personal questions like that in Chinese." And then on this side to Martin, my husband, "Hey, money is quite a common topic to talk about in the Chinese culture." And at that moment, the conversation just moved on. So this is a moment that just shows the potential cultural conflict that exists between East and West. And hence my point, the role that international education and especially international schools has to play in building those cultural bridges between East and West. I'm the founder of Wellington College Education in China, and the fact that I'm doing what I'm doing now is actually shaped by my own personal experience. Today's day, OASIS Day, is AI themed. So we are going to talk about how to build sustainable, ethical, and useful AI in schools. I was trained as a computer scientist myself. So I went to Oxford for university and my undergraduate degree was in computer science. So I've always been interested in technology and the development of technology and how it can help us do our jobs better. But lately, the bigger question I ask myself is, as machines become more and more capable at just about anything and everything to human being, what is education still for? What are schools still for? About a year ago, I listened to a Lex Fridman podcast, and it was with Neuralink, Elon Musk's company that develops these human-computer brain interfaces. So we can indeed now really imagine a future where human being and machines are integrated. So it's no longer just artificial intelligence or even AGI, artificial general intelligence. It's actually hybrid intelligence where you can no longer define the boundary between human and machine. But anyway, the podcast went on a long time. There were a few different people, Elon himself included. But the one comment that really stuck with me in that podcast with the chief neurosurgeon from Neuralink. His name was Matthew McDougall. He was the chief neurosurgeon, and his role in the process as the human surgeon is to open the skull. And then after he does that, a robot surgeon inserts these electrodes, all 1,024 of them, into the surface of the human brain, avoiding all blood vessels in the process, with an efficiency and accuracy that the human hand cannot achieve. So when Lex Fridman asked Matthew, "Do you think your job will be replaced by robots altogether one day?" Matthew is probably in his maybe early 50s, late 40s, early 50s. He said, I'm not worried about my job in the course of my professional life, but I've told my kids not to go into this line of work. And we are talking about a neurosurgeon here. If a neurosurgeon is even thinking that one day his job can be completely replaced by machine and telling his children not to go into this line of work, as educators, we probably cannot imagine many jobs today that absolutely cannot be done by machines in 20 years' time, and certainly in 30, 40, 50 years' time. And then that brings the bigger question, what are schools for? One framework that came out of OECD. So OECD published a paper last November. The paper is entitled Education for Human Flourishing. In fact, Michael is in Shanghai at the moment. Yesterday, we had a Wellington College Education Forum, and Michael is the guest speaker. Michael is in fact working with Wellington College Education now as the founding director of Human Flourishing. He's going to work with our group globally to define the new framework and the new purpose for education. So this paper's main thesis is not him alone. He worked with multiple world governments and their education authorities to come up with this framework. For the past maybe 50 years, half a century, the theory was mainly education for human capital. So education's purpose and its effectiveness was primarily measured in how much more productive we make human beings. So we see human being as a tool of economic productivity. So this new paper, Education for Human Flourishing, argues that we need to move away from that model. Of course, economic productivity is still very important, but that's just part of life. And we should be conducting education for the purpose of human flourishing. And he gives a framework that argues that in order to flourish as individuals and in societies and in our relationship with the planet, we need to be educating for 5 competencies: appreciating the world, understanding the world, and acting in the world. And when we're acting in the world, of particular importance is our ethical competence, and then our ability to solve complex problems. So that's the new OECD framework for education for human flourishing. And put it in the context of my own life experience and my passion, when I think about how I am going to act in the world, and what is my purpose and meaning in my acting in the world, it comes back to this building cultural bridges between different nations and between different cultures, especially those between China and the Western world, because I see the chasm between these 2 cultures as being the greatest. So I was born in Shanghai and raised in Shanghai. I actually went through my entire K-12 education in Shanghai. Then, as I said, I went to England and went to Oxford to do my undergraduate degree. I met my British husband there, and we've been together for over 20 years now, and we raised 2 mixed race boys who are half Chinese and half British. Hence, that defined who I am. When I first arrived in Oxford in the late 1990s, I myself, who have never really left China, the only trip I made outside of China before I went to Oxford was to Japan, and that's very close culturally. The first time I landed in England to go to Oxford was my first time in Europe. I experienced 2 major cultural shocks immediately: language and food. I thought I learned English in China until I arrived in England. Because in those days, the textbook goes, "How do you do?" And you're supposed to say, "How do you do?" back. At Oxford, nobody talked like that. They all went, "All right. How's your day? How's it going?" And all these vocabularies that I didn't have, like a pound was a quid. A man is a bloke. A young woman is a bird. And that certainly wasn't the English I learned. So it took at least 3 to 6 months before I was able to have a 2-way conversation. For a long time, I was very quiet and I just simply listened and observed what's going on. And food is a different thing, isn't it? For those of you who are not used to Chinese food or Asian food, you would probably feel the immense shock the first time you come. Who eats bamboo? I had bamboo for breakfast this morning. Who eats bamboo? Am I a panda? Spring bamboo, which is very tender, and chicken's feet and fish head, all these food. So food and language are those superficial things that are obviously cultural shock if you're not used to it, but people are usually more understanding of it. So being a non-British, the fact that my English was broken, my English friends are very understanding of it. But there are other differences when they're seeing through different cultural lenses. They can cause deeper and greater offense. So if we come back to the dinner table moment, so To Martin, who is British, the question about his income is very private. It's seen as an intrusion of his own privacy and personal space. And the topic of money is certainly a sensitive one and very private one. The reason why it is much more open in a Chinese family is because in large part, the extended family operates as an economic unit. So money does flow on a regular basis between generations, even after the children reach adulthood, depending on the needs. So my parents certainly always knew about me and Martin's income. So when we first came back to China, when our income were low, they subsidized our rent. My parents lent me the deposit for my first apartment that we bought in Beijing. And when the boys were very young, they received generous hongbao. Hongbao are these red envelopes with money stuffed in it. That's given at Chinese New Year. So that's very normal. That's very common. So the information about income is not a pointless intrusion of your privacy. It's actually useful information to judge the total income of the family and which way the money ought to flow in order to support each other. So now, of course, me and Martin, we're much better off. So there is the expectation, even though my parents don't need the money, we still regularly give them money every year because there is that expectation. So that intergeneration money flow. When I witness Martin's family and most of my British friends, I can see that this sort of thing happens much less. So rarely money flows between generations once children reach adulthood. And certainly almost never upwards. So people paying their parents is almost unheard of in my experience in the British culture. Hence, you can see the deeper cultural reasons between the different behaviors. And this I would highlight as one of the key differences between the East and Western culture, the valuing of interdependence, where personal boundaries are blurred, but you're expected to support each other, versus that of independence, the self-sufficiency and clear personal boundary, those being valued in the Western culture. So that's one example. And it has implication in our schools day in, day out, because in our schools here in China, our Western leaders tend not to want to involve parents if there are conflicts between children. So if they get into a fight, Western leaders nodding, yeah, we deal with it with the children, between the children, right? But in the Chinese culture, quite often you need to involve the parents to show the seriousness of it. So in the Western culture, we value the pupil's autonomy. They should be responsible for their action. But in China, because the family is seen as a unit, so involving the parents shows the seriousness of the matter, and sometimes any fights between children would need the apologies between parents to resolve the issue. Until that boy's father apologized to me, I don't see the matter as closed. So those are the cultural differences, which I know, I see our Chinese leaders smiling. I know, operating these international schools with a British ethos in China, we need to deal with these. I know at the senior leadership level, you debate these issues day in, day out, isn't it? And we need both sides of the leadership team, the Western side and the Chinese side, to trust each other and to cover each other's blind spot, to come up with the good solutions to resolve each case. So when I reflect on the dinner table case, the reason I could do what I did was because I was fluent in both languages. That's one thing. And I was fluent in both cultures. I know what the norm is for both cultures. And the third important factor is that I already had the trust of both sides. So both my British husband and my Chinese aunt saw me as one of them, which is why I could close the matter with just one sentence on each side, and both parties just moved on from that. And that's exactly what's needed in our organization when we have Western leaders and Chinese leaders working side by side. It's not that one culture dominates the other. It's that we're truly equal and open-minded, and we're curious in terms of understanding the underlying reasons why differences are, and having that professional debate. It's a leadership opportunity, having that professional debate in resolving issues, trusting that the other side is covering my blind spot. So that's the one key difference I wanted to highlight, that interdependence interdependence versus independence. Another very obvious one is the encouragement of personal expression. So I was at an Imagine Dragons concert, Imagine Dragon concert about a month ago in Shanghai. It was a wonderful concert. We're in the Shanghai stadium. Everybody had seats. Every so often, a few people wanted to get up and dance with music, but there were security personnel there just get people to sit down, because if you stand up, the people behind you are forced to stand up. They can't see. There was this one Western gentleman who was the only one remaining in our section, and he was just looking around confused because he wants to, go with the music and dance. And people behind him say, hey, please sit down. He said, come on, let's just all stand up and dance. And when nobody else joined him at that moment, he just sat down in confusion. He thought, what kind of pop concert is that? Because at these concerts, it's usually young, expressive people. It only took a big hit song like Shots before everybody stood up, and myself included, and we just danced until the end. So that's another example of the acceptance or encouragement of self-expression. While in the Chinese society is typically more orderly, and self-expression are kind of a little bit discouraged, and certainly if it causes inconvenience to other people. But in the Western culture, it is you're much more encouraged to be colorful, to stand out rather than to fit in. And that has implication in a Chinese classroom as well. Compared to international schools, I heard some of our teachers talking about in our early years, pupils just raise their hands even before the teacher finished asking the question. They don't even know what they want to say yet, but they just want to express that they want to say something. And that is much more acceptable in our setting, in our culture. And so the difference here lies in the different relationship in the society. In the Chinese society, it's much more hierarchical. So there is a pecking order in the relationship between the older generation and the younger generation, between teacher and students, between boss and employee. While in the Western culture, even though these different roles exist, the relationship is more egalitarian. But that hierarchical relationship is deeply rooted in China. Even when I was young, I was told by my parents, who are pretty progressive for their time, that when the older generation are having a conversation, it's not your time to speak out. You have no place to speak out when we are having a conversation. Therefore, in the hierarchical relationship, people are staying quiet, probably because they're wanting to show respect, or they only say things when they're very sure. It's not necessarily for lack of ability or their own personal opinion that they're staying quiet. So how we interpret such quietness or shyness, again, is through different cultural lenses. There is a saying, Confucius said, something like, beautiful words are seldom associated with virtues. In Chinese, it's 巧言令色,鲜矣仁. So being understated and quiet is a virtue in the Chinese hierarchical culture, but being expressive and expressing your opinion is encouraged in the Western culture. The disadvantage of the Chinese way is that if children are not encouraged to speak up, they typically become less good at it. Therefore, it is true, myself included, I do find public speaking or clearly articulate my opinion as something that I have to train myself to do after adulthood. But in our school, oracy is a key part of the education in our international school in China. So that's another difference. So what we are talking about here really is cultural fluency. For us to be able to notice differences in different places you go without judgment, without automatically thinking one is better than the other, but we are curious and open-minded enough to dig deeper, to think what's the reason behind these differences, and therefore to understand it and appreciate it. Go back to that OECD model, understanding the world, appreciating the world before we can act in the world in an ethical way. So that cultural bridge building, and especially the role of international schools in this cultural bridge building, is so immense that it becomes my passion. It is because we in international schools, we sit at the intersection of cultures. People who work in international educations, they travel and live and work in different places and different culture. And they have themselves adapted to a very different cultural norm. That process is almost like exercising a certain muscle that you wouldn't normally be able to exercise if you just stay in one place. But once you exercise that muscle, if you go to another culture and another culture, that muscle is already there. You're much more adaptable and flexible and open-minded, and you're a better human being as a result of it. So recently, we had an alumni gathering event in London where our Wellington College China alumni were gathered there. One girl who recently graduated from Hiba, Shanghai. Hiba is our bilingual school, English-Chinese bilingual schools in the Wellington network. She said, oh, I didn't have any cultural shock. Language was fine, food was fine. I was comfortable with the expectation of homework and the classroom discussion, even down to the style of the furniture. The furniture looks familiar. She was at Imperial College in London. And other people at the event saying they were part of the college play or they were in the sports team. So in other words, these children who got educated by our international schools here, even though they never lived in Britain, they didn't experience the same cultural shock when they went to Britain, like the ones I experienced, many years ago. Just like how our school canteen food always have Chinese options and Western options every day, the students comfortably switch between them. When they see their Western leaders and Western teachers and Chinese teachers taking a different perspective and having a different style of teaching or classroom discussion, they see that as normal as well. Therefore, the cultural fluency was educated in these children from a very young age. Just to wrap up, why is that important? Coming back to today's theme, which is AI, I see technology as an amplifier. Technology is an amplifier. It actually magnifies human intent, good and bad, in an unprecedented scale and speed today. So, if we combine the development and advancement in technology with good human intent, that we have deep connection to each other, that we live on this planet together, we want to mutually support and flourish together, then technology has the potential of resolving all the biggest challenges for mankind once and for all. Energy shortage, for example, global warming, diseases, or education. Good education for all. All of these has the potential of being solved by technology. But if we combine technology with ill intent, when we mistrust each other, misunderstand each other, when we get into a mode of conflict and confrontation or competition, then technology has the potential exponentially to increase the risk for us all, which is why, coming back to even in an AI-themed day, when we are probably going to talk about how we are going to use AI responsibility in our education, I come back to the human intent, which is really at the heart and the core of education of today, how we are nurturing our young pupils to explore, to understand, and to guide their intent from a very young age. In an international school setting where multilingual education is the norm, so pupil being able to speak more than one language, in that process, they have multiple cultural lenses through which to understand and appreciate the world and increase harmony in the world. My son Daniel, who grew up in Shanghai, by the way, at Wellington, but goes to UK every year, he's now studying at an American university. So when me and my husband Martin, we sometimes jokingly sort of fight each other for the attention and identity of our son. So once when I asked Daniel, do you think you're more Chinese or more English? Daniel's answer, he said, I think I'm 60% Chinese, but also 60% English and 30% American. We didn't even know there's an American percentage there, but he spent so many years in America, he does feel. So his whole point is, I add up to more than 100%. And that's the whole point. But isn't that, how beautifully put is that? Don't we just need more people in the world who add up to more than 100%? And I see that as the purpose and meaning and drive for international education in our setting, bridging East and West, fostering mutual understanding and appreciation between mankind, between one another, for this harmonious future world that we are going to all share. Thank you.